What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the TCG Empire YouTube channel. I know it's been a while, but today for you I have a LA Regionals recap. And I have to say, before I get into the deck list and how matchups went, the event was pretty good. I managed to place top 256. I'll get into it later, but I was in day 2 contention. And we did go with Old Reliable with Charizard. The weekend was pretty good. I got to see a bunch of familiar faces. I got to do some testing. Zach came out and stayed with me. So overall, the weekend was something that was pretty enjoyable and something that I definitely didn't take for granted. I really enjoyed myself and I actually had a great time. So leading into the event, I wasn't too sure as to what to play just because I did have finals coming up, so most of my time was dedicated towards ensuring that I could pass my classes. So I wasn't really too sure as to what to play. I didn't want to play something that would take, too much thinking, like something like Ancient Box, where I would have to just constantly think about the math and how many cards I would need to discard. I didn't want to play something like GM Pow that would rely on me making sure that I could sequence 100% accurately each round. And I kind of didn't want to play something like Lugia just because with Lugia I tended to have situations where I would brick. So I ended up going with Charizard just because it was something that I had tested a lot. Me and Hale worked on a list for quite a bit of time. I didn't end up playing that list, but it was something that gave me the grounds of just kind of testing Zard. And if I was going to play a mirror, I was more focused on ensuring that I could do well in the Zard mirror. So we're going to get into the deck list now. The deck list really isn't too crazy. It's got a couple of nice cards, but it was just mainly based on the weekend that I thought I was going to have. So the first cards that we have are 3 of these 60 HP Charmanders. Now, these were the optimal ones to play just because of Heat Tackle. And if you guys watched my How to Play Charizard video, I actually talked about how against something like Snorlax Control, you could actually Heat Tackle a few times, and it did come up quite a few times. And there's some other matchups where the Heat Tackle actually did a good amount of damage. So we were just playing 3 of these, and then the 4th copy was the Charmander with Blazing Destruction. Now, the 70 HP one really just depends on what you plan on playing against. The promo one does well against things like Dialga, but overall with this Charmander, having the access to Blazing Destruction meant that I could clear a stadium if I needed to, as well as a tool. I could use something like my Vacuum to get rid of a tool in play, and then if I absolutely needed to, I could Blazing Destruction, get rid of something like a Collapsed Stadium, providing that, my opponent had one in play and I couldn't play my own counter stadium. And it also gave me the aspects of being able to use Steady Fire Breathing without having to damage myself. So no situations really came up where I used Blazing Destruction, but it was better to have it than for me to miss it. So that's really it for the Charmanders. It's pretty self-explanatory on why we play those. And then we have the Flare Veil Charmeleon. I expected there to be Snorlax Control, but in the aspects of me playing this Charmander, I didn't really think that I needed to worry too much on playing the Charmeleon that could KO Mimikyus. I felt pretty confident in being able to Heat Tackle, but even then, Zard just has a terrible matchup into Snorlax that didn't really matter too much, and having Flare Veil was a lot better in case I ran into the random Rogue Giratina or anything else that, I could be protected by. Plus, this also helped against TM Devo in case I did run into the mirror, and I didn't get set back. And then, of course, we have 3 Charizard EX now. This is just the main attacker. As we talked about in the video, it powers itself up, it powers up the board, makes for great plays. So playing 3 of those just to ensure that we consistently hit it. And then we had a 2-2 Pidgeot line. I went with the Call for Family Pidgey just because in case there were turns where I didn't draw Arven or Puffin, I still had the ability to Call for Family and potentially set up a board state. And then we had the 2 Pidgeot EX, of course, just for the consistency aspects. And then we had a 1-1 Bibarel. This was just in here just in case I ran into things like Roxanne. I expected to play quite a few mirrors, but depending on what I was playing against, it just gave me an out to not having to deal a whole lot with TM Devo. And I still had a backup draw support in case Pidgeot got knocked out. And in the Tina matchup, I didn't really have to set up Pidgeot if I didn't want to. I could slap down Bibarel and not have to worry about giving up 2 prizes. And Bibarel actually won me quite a few games just because I could use Industrious Incisors to draw. And then the rest of the one-ofs are more support Pokemon. So we have Radiant Charizard. It's just a great closer, and in certain matchups, it's really strong to just swing with because it is a 1-prizer that can deal a massive amount of damage. We had Manaphy just because I expected a lot of Chiampao, so I wanted to ensure that I could keep my board clear from dealing with Greninjas. We had Cleffa. It's a great free retreat option, and Grasping Draw for no energy requirements is a great pivot, especially if you don't want to put a Rotom in play. And then we had Lumineon with Luminous Sign. Just ensured that I could grab a supporter and then Rotom, which allowed me to consistently get extra cards in play and in my hand, so that way I could work better for the turn 2. So the Pokemon lines are really strong. There's no real need for Jirachi. I didn't expect a lot of Lost Box coming into this tournament, so I wasn't too worried about not having the Jirachi, and even if worse come to worse, my main attacker is Charizard, so I did have the Flare Veil Charmeleon to evolve into if I needed it. Now, the supporters are a bit weird. We do have 3 Arven. Some lists play 4, some lists play 3. I usually prefer 4, but with the Arven counts being at 3, I just felt pretty comfortable, especially with playing Lumineon. It gave me another target for having 4 Sealstone, but also it allowed me to grab Arven, and Arven really isn't super necessary on a turn-to-turn basis. It's just more reliant on helping you set up your board. So I only needed 3, and there's other reasons for that too. And then we also have the 2 bosses orders. I ran 2 boss just because I felt like it was important to ensure that if I did play against something that could strip my hand away, like Art Control or Arceus, that I didn't have to rely on Counter Catcher or Prime Catcher. It still gave me an out to being able to find something, and I could Lumineon for the boss. Then there's 2 Iono. This is really the only thing that I regret. I wish I would have had 3 Iono just for certain matchups, but 2 Iono felt okay in a lot of matchups. I honestly didn't really play it a whole lot. It is a good card depending on what you're playing against, but Iono, I didn't use a whole lot, but I definitely wish that I had 3 in the matchups that I did play against, but 2 sufficed for the general matchups that I played against, so it wasn't too big of a deal. And the cards that I cut Iono for were actually a lot more important. Then we have Turo. Turo's just in here just so that way I can reset the board if I need to, get a 2-prizer out of play. If there's a random awkward scenario where I start Lumineon and have Rotom in play, I can Turo one of them and then collapse the other, so that way I don't have 2 prizes just sitting on the board, and it also helps to establish 1-prize boards pretty consistently. Then Erie's in here just, again, for more disruption. I went for a more aggro, but also control-based Zard list, so I wanted to make sure that I could win the mirror, and Erie is a great card in the mirror, and against Chiampao, you can strip her candies, and it's not too detrimental as a supporter for you to play for the turn. It really helps to disrupt consistency, especially against things like Arc, or playing against things like Chiampao, and even Ancient Box. Against Ancient Box, if you can Eerie and get rid of their Ultra Ball so that way they can't discard more Ancient cards, it's really huge. And then we had Roxanne. Roxanne was a great supporter. Most of the time, I was going on the routes of 2-2-2, so Roxanne wasn't as reliable as I would just usually boss for game, but in the situations where Roxanne did come up, there were about 2 situations. Roxanne was huge just because it allowed for me to see more cards, but also disrupt my opponent. So that's it for the supporters, and then for the stadiums. Now, the tech stadiums that did play for this weekend were to Lost City. Lost City was huge. It was mainly in here, so that way against Chiampao, you can Lost City the Baxcaliburs. Normally they'll expect 1, but when you throw the second one out, it's not a whole lot that they can do, and being able to Lost City Baxcalibur is huge. It's also really good against Ancient Box, as you can Lost City their Roaring Moon, so that way they can't get the attackers back. You can Roaring Moon, or you can Lost City other things than Roaring Moon, which just basically takes away damage output, but also paired with being able to vacuum a tool away in the Ancient Box matchup, it means that you can get rid of a tool. Plus, you can also Lost City, and if they're playing Cobalion, you can Lost City the Cobalion, which takes away a lot of damage. If you're able to get rid of Cobalion and get rid of a general tool that they have in play that's ancient, you're technically taking away 40 damage, which means that there's a lot more that they have to work for taking a knockout on a Zard. And then we have the one Collapse Stadium. I still kept Collapse in here. I was talking with Sam Chen during the tournament, and he was saying that he dropped Collapse Stadium for a third Lost City. I wanted to fit 3, but I also respected the mirror enough to make sure that I still had ways to get Vs out of play if I wanted to use a different supporter for turn. Playing Iono into Pidgeot for Collapse to get rid of something like Rotom is really huge, so Collapse definitely put in work this weekend, and it helped me put some 1 prize boards into play. And then for the tools, we have TM Devo. I only played 1 just because I didn't expect to play a lot of the mirror, but in the matchups where it mattered, having the 1 was fine, and being able to Arven for it is huge, but having the 1 TM Devo didn't hurt too much against Chiampao. I just planned on using Eerie to get rid of rare candies, and then if I absolutely had to, I could devolve, but most of the time I was trying to put backs in the Lost Zone. Then I had Defiance Band, which is actually huge. The Zard Mirror kind of relies on your opponent taking the first knockout, so Defiance Band was great as it allowed for me to kind of come back and prize trade, but also be able to add plus 30, so that way I could benefit off of my opponent taking 1 prize, but treating it as 2. Forest Seal Stone, this is pretty self-explanatory. It just gives me a V star power, so that way I can potentially set up my board, or I can, find a supporter I need. It's just a very strong card, and it's super, super unique to be able to use and ensure that you can get turn 2 Pidgeot or Charizard. For Buddy Buddy Puffin, this is just self-explanatory. It's what helps sets up your board. Then we have 4 Rare Candy. These are absolutely needed to be played as 4 just because you are playing 2 Stage 2s. 4 Ultra Ball. You have 4 Ultra Ball in here just so that way you can thin dead cards, so that way when you play Iono or Roxanne later, you're not drawing into those dead cards, and you can kind of thin as much as possible. But it also helps to search out a lot of the deck that kind of relies on you playing from hand, such as Pidgeot or Charizard or Lumineon, really anything that you might need. Plus, it never hurts to kind of just burn some cards that you might be able to get back later. That's it for the 4 of items. Now, the 2 of, we have 2 Super Rod. This is just mainly in here so that you have recovery. We are only playing 6 energy, and you want to ensure that you can get them back. Plus, also being able to get back attackers, such as Radzard in the late game, plus some energy is huge. And if your opponent manages to knock out any of your resource Pokemon like Pidgeot, you need to be able to set it back up. Now, for the 1 of items, we do have 1 Nest Ball. I only played 1 just because most of the time I was just using Nest Ball to search out Rotom. Everything else that you really need on bench to start the game can be searched out by Puffin. Radzard can't, but again, you can Nest Ball for Radzard if you need to. You can Ultra Ball for pretty much everything that you might want turn 1, but most of the time, Nest Ball brings out the Pokemon that Puffin or, Puffin can't get, or you don't want to Ultra Ball or don't open Ultra Ball. So Nest Ball, I felt confident with only running 1, and it worked out. Then we have Lost Vacuum. Lost Vacuum's pretty much a must. It just kind of helps to ensure that you can prize trade evenly into something like Guardy. It helps to ensure that you can mess up the math with Ancient Box, and it also helps versus Control or the Mirror if they play the Cape, as you can vacuum it and not have to worry about it. Countercatcher, I only played 1 just because while I was playing a defensive, while I was playing aggro / control Zard, there were still a couple times where I would be behind in prizes. It's mainly for the mirror, just so that way you can Arven for something like Countercatcher plus a Defiance Band, so that way you can kind of hit the math that you need to. Then Palpad, I decided to play Palpad just so that way it allowed for me to get back the supporters. My supporter lines are kind of thin, so being able to Palpad them back in and then Pidgeot search is definitely huge. There were a couple of great plays where it all just kind of worked out. And then we have Prime Catcher. Prime Catcher was the A-Spec of choice. The morning of, I decided to switch to Prime Catcher from Hero's Cape. Hale played Hero's Cape, and I was kind of convinced, but I enjoyed Prime Catcher just because it let me kind of be aggressive in the areas I needed to. Plus, also, with playing Lost City, I wanted to maximize my chances at being able to bring up and Lost Zone, something that my opponent had, and Prime Catcher felt like the better thing to play, especially against Chiam Pao. The only things that really were important for Hero's Cape were Chiam Pao and Ancient Box, just because they have to discard so many resources to be able to attack with either deck. And having Prime Catcher just kind of solidified that, you know, I can bring up Excalibur and Lost Zone it rather than taking a big, you know, chunk of damage that really is going to be irrelevant. And Cape is kind of irrelevant in a sense if your opponent ends up, you know, discarding your Cape. So Prime Catcher felt like the play, and it ended up working out for me greatly. And then finally for the energy, I ended up just playing 6 fires. I didn't play Mist. I didn't miss having Mist energy. It was weird playing 6 energy. I could have gone for 7, but I wasn't too worried about it. 6 felt like enough, especially with Super Rod. It was just a matter of how many I would prize, but overall, it wasn't too bad. I didn't miss having Mist energy just because I didn't expect to play against a lot of TM Devo. I expected to play against Chiam Pao's, Control, potentially, and Ancient Boxes, and maybe even the Arctinas. Now, Arctina is a little bit awkward just because they do run Devo at times, but overall, I wasn't too worried about not having it. And there were some other things that, you know, I needed to make room for. Ultimately, from this list, I ended up changing the Mist energy as well as, I think, a counter catcher for the 2 Lost City, and then my A-Spec became Prime. So that's pretty much the overall deck list. We'll get into my matchups real quick, just so that way I can talk about it. There wasn't anything too important. Round 1, I played against the Zard Mirror. The Zard Mirror was the one thing that, you know, takes a lot of brain power to be able to play, but I wasn't too worried about it just because I had played it a lot, and when Hale was helping me play Zard, the one thing we talked about the most was the Zard Mirror, so I kind of felt confident going into it, and my round 1 opponent was great. He was a nice guy. He, you know, played very well. We only managed to play 1 game, but it was super solid. It was a quick 1-0. I just kind of got the aggression, and I timed Devo perfectly, so that way he ran out of resources, and I played my math right and got to the 1 prizer board. So that was a quick 1-0, and then I played against the Zard Mirror again. Now this time it was a little bit different, just because my opponent was a little bit more, you know, focused on trying to set up their Pidgeot and Charizard and start attacking. And in the Zard Mirror, it's a little bit tough to do that. Now, given my opponent was new, I wasn't too worried about, you know, trying to set up my board. I wanted to play the Zard Mirror and letting my opponent take the prize, and then I could go and establish some damage output and go from there. So, another game, I'm pretty sure it was 2-0. It was a 2-0 game. My opponent did have a slight misplay with over searching and getting extra Pidgeots out and stuff when there wasn't really a need to. The Nest Ball that he played could have been used for Rotom to draw some extra cards, so there was a slight thing in that, but I don't think it changed the matchup too much. Again, just being familiar with the Zard Mirror and learning how to play it is really the best thing you can do. And then round 3, I played against Roaring Moon. Now, if you guys watched my How to Play Zard video, I talked about how the 60 HP Charmander is really strong against Moon just because you can use Heat Tackle in order to KO a Moon after they attack you. My opponent played really aggressive and took an early knockout, but because of that early knockout on a 1 prizer, I was able to evolve into Zard, attach a Defiance Band, and take a knockout back and kind of set them back in terms of, you know, what they have access to. They didn't have Greninja in play, and I was able to just really solidify things with Iono. And then game 2, my opponent put an Ancient Booster, took 2 prizes on Illuminion, and because they, you know, or I'm sorry, not Luminion, they didn't have a They didn't have... That's what it was. They didn't have a stadium in play, so they had to use Frenzy Gouging. They put 200 on themselves, and they did have a Ancient Booster Capsule, so they were plus 60. So I was able to use Heat Tackle with a Defiance Band to take the knockout and kind of trade efficiently with a 1-prize board, so I didn't have to worry too much. And that was a quick 2-0 as well. Wasn't anything too crazy, so I was 3-0 at this point. And then round 4, I played against Snorlax. Now, again, I tried my best to Heat Tackle, but my opponent was just drawing amazing, playing well, getting rid of everything in my hand, and there wasn't a whole lot I could do. So I took an L to Snorlax, but I was okay with that. I was expecting to lose to Snorlax, so I wasn't upset. So I was 3-1 at that point, and then I played against Arctina Leaves. This Arctina player played, what was it, 4 Lost City, 2 Leaves, 2 Rod, and Prime Catcher. So I tried my hardest to win that matchup. I had some awful prizes. Game 1, I prized 2 Fire and 2 Charizard, so there wasn't a whole lot I could do to come back, especially when the Iron Leaves took a knockout. And then game 2, my opponent again just got out the double Leaves, and there wasn't a whole lot I could do. I tried to establish a turn 1 board, but it didn't really work out too much. And then we had the round 5 where I went into the round at 3-2. This was my redemption round. I played against the Zard Mirror again, and I managed to win the set 1-0. It was a really long game, and ironically enough, I only had a single Charizard out. I didn't even have Pidgeot, and I didn't have Bibarel. My Bibarel was prized, so Bidoof was down, but Bibarel was kind of lackluster, and Pidgeot was used, but I managed to get a turn 2 Charizard as well as a turn 2 Pidgeot, and then my opponent used Devo, and I had to use Rare Candy to evolve into Pidgeot, and then Rare Candy into Zard, so I was completely out of Rare Candies. I eventually got a second Charizard out by the time my active one was KO'd, so my opponent KO'd the active one, and then on the bench I had the Charmeleon. So my opponent, took the knockout here, and I promoted Charmeleon. I evolved into Charizard. I bossed around my opponent's Zards, so that way they both had 200 plus damage on them. And then my opponent benched a third Charmander. I knocked that out, so that way my opponent couldn't evolve into it. And then Roxanne my opponent to 2 and put a Devo on Zard and took a knockout. So I timed the Devo perfectly, and my opponent ended up just scooping because there was not much that they could do. I took out all of their Charmanders. They managed to get another Charizard out the turn that I Devo'd after in Roxanne, but it wasn't a whole lot that they could do. There was kind of no recovery, and I made the I think 2-5 comeback. My opponent had 2 prizes left and I had 5, but I managed to kind of play to my out, and it worked out. Then round number, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Round 7, I played against Arctina Leaves again. I managed to take the W in this game, and it was only because I decided to be really aggressive. I ended up starting Lumineon, and my opponent took a knockout with Arc. And because my opponent took 2 prizes, it meant that Radzard only cost 3 energy to attack with. My opponent had an Arc V-Star in the active and a Giratina V-Star on the bench. So what I ended up doing was evolving into a Charizard EX, powering up the Radiant Charizard with 3 energy, and I used Arven to grab Counter Catcher plus Defiance Band, and actually knocked out the Giratina V-Star for 280 damage, taking 2 prizes while having a Radiant Charizard in the active, so my opponent kind of had to play around that. It was just a very long game 1, but we managed to have a great game, and shout out to my opponent Jared. He was such a great guy to play against, and the matchup was definitely scary, but I managed to kind of make a comeback and make plays that really benefited me. And I was a nervous wreck the whole time just because Arctina Leaves with Radzard is pretty scary to play against, but I managed to time everything perfectly. and it all worked out in my favor. And then round 8, we played against Arc Control. This was just the standard, Arc with Eerie and Lost City and Grabber and Jet Energies and stuff like that. So I was pretty scared into it, and unfortunately my opponent did dead draw for a couple games. A couple turns. My opponent dead drew in game 1. Managed to get an arc out, but that was pretty much it. I took a knockout on that and kind of established a checkmate just with Charizard and stuff, and Radzard on the bench. And from that, my opponent scooped. And then game 2, it was kind of the same thing. My opponent was able to use Bib and did put Spiritomb down to lock my Lumineon from being able to grab something like Turo, because my opponent did trap the Bibarel in the active, but I was able to use Lost Vacuum and Lost Vacuum away the Hero's Cape on the active Bibarel, and then I was able to just use Bibarel for myself and draw into the Turo, to which I Turoed and took a knockout, and it was pretty good. It was a good couple games on my end, unfortunate for my opponent. So I was 6-2 at this point. I was in contention for day 1. I just had to hope that my opponent would ID round 9. And when I got to round 9, I asked my opponent if they wanted to intentional draw so we could both make day 2, and my opponent said no. So in that case, I had to play it out, and unfortunately, I played the Zard Mirror again, but this time I was on the bad end of things. I dead drew. My opponent got a turn 2 Charizard, a turn 2 Pidgeot, and a turn 2 Bibarel, with only playing a 1-1 Pidgeot and 1-1 Bibarel. So it was pretty scary. My opponent played a couple techs too, so there was no coming back from it. And then game 2, I didn't get Pidgeot or Bibarel out, and I tried my hardest. I got down to 2 prizes. I Iono'd my opponent to a couple cards, and just had to hope, and my opponent ended up being able to Iono themselves plus Bibarel into Jet Energy, so there wasn't a whole lot that I could do. Their Iono got rid of the hand that I played, but overall, I mean, no fault to my opponent. They wanted to play an extra game rather than both of us make day 2, and with day 2, that's kind of how it is. You want more wins going into it, so, being 7-2 is a lot better than 6-1 for trying to go for top 8 or top 16. So I definitely respect my opponent. It would have been the first time in 6 years that I had day 2'd, but I wasn't too stressed out about it. I knew that if my opponent had decided to intentional draw, we both would have made day 2. So in my heart, I still feel accomplished and I still feel happy. And going into the final round, I was guaranteed day 2 if my opponent had decided to ID. So it was overall, a good tournament experience. I got to see a bunch of friends. I got to see Hale. I got to see his son, spend some time with him. I got to spend time with Andrew. I'm sorry. Andrew is Hale's son. I just said that. I got to spend time with Zach. I got to spend time with my friend Brandon. I got to meet a bunch of people who I haven't seen in a long time, like Sammy Sosa, Sam Chen. And overall, it was just a great time at regionals. So I want to thank you guys for, all the love and support. I'm sorry for the lack of uploads. Again, finals and the little bit of testing I could do for LA ended up kind of prolonging things. But I think that pretty much sums it up. We managed to place 253rd, so we did get some championship points. Now, with the way the world was this year, I didn't go for my Worlds invite, but it was nice to break 100 points for the season before it ends and do well at a regionals that, is kind of close to me. So I think that pretty much explains everything. So again, thank you guys for all of the love and support on the channel. I greatly appreciate all of you. If you have any questions about, my list on why I ran things the way I did or how I did in a certain matchup, or you want more in-depth explanations as to how I played a certain matchup, let me know down in the comments. But otherwise, thank you guys for everything again. If you guys do enjoy today's video, do me a favor, smash the like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. It would be greatly appreciative, and it's free. So again, thank you guys for everything. And with that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video. Later.